Hello. Well, I suppose I ought to start by reminding people to subscribe, share, like the videos that I'm doing, if you like the videos I'm doing. I wanted to talk today about the problems with Reform UK as a party at the moment. It is going through what I thought it would start to go through, which is as it grows, it can't just be one person's party. The very nature of a political party is that it's people coming together to create a platform for people to vote for. It's not one person. And its success last year at the general election was all really about Nigel Farage. The party wasn't led by him until that election came along. And then Richard Tice got him in and made him the leader. And the success followed that. It's something to do with Nigel Farage in his support for parties, support for ideas, that is successful. He's a charismatic person. He's a populist, and populist politicians are people who will say whatever they think is popular, regardless of the facts. It's often a rather simplistic way of doing politics, because politics is about lives. It's about how we live our lives, and the issues are complex. So having someone who says something that lots of people pick up on and agree with is obviously successful. It obviously gets people on board, but it lacks sometimes that nuance that you need to explain things in a more complex way. I'll give you an example of where Nigel Farage falls short on this, because he's not a very good politician in many ways. Successful in building up a party, but he lacks something. And what he lacks is nuance. Whenever you've seen him interviewed, and if you haven't seen him interviewed, try and search it out, he falls flat quite quickly because his messages are simplistic. And the moment you start to get into the detail, he struggles. So saying something in a simplistic way about disliking immigration, it's very easy. You can just say it. What does that mean? Does he mean that he doesn't want anybody coming into the country? Because that's what I think people think he means. But he doesn't mean that. When he's being questioned on immigration, the obvious questions come up. Well, we need nurses and doctors. We need builders. We need a mix of different type of worker in the country because we haven't got them ourselves, or we haven't got enough of them. And if you accept that as true, which you might not, you might do, if you accept it as true that there aren't enough of various types of worker in the country, you've got options. You can train people up. You can train people to be builders. You can train people to be nurses. You can train people to be doctors, or whatever industry you think is lacking the workers. But it takes time. It takes a lot of time for someone to become a doctor. It takes a lot of time for someone to become a nurse. You don't just make these people instantaneously. And if you accept that, so you've got two things to accept here: that we need certain types of worker and that it takes time for them to be trained up. If you accept those two things, there's only one possible option, and that is that you bring them from outside of the country and they arrive as immigrants. And he's accepted that in interviews. He has said, yeah, we do need skilled workers, is often the phrase that people use. So he's got a mixed message coming out, and it doesn't always feel like he's got a mixed message. And so I think he finds it easy to say the simplistic things, but it's harder to work out what the policies would actually be if he came anywhere near getting power. And it's been interesting the last few days because since the success that they had in getting 5 MPs at last year's general election, I thought that there would be some internal difficulty at some point. Lots of people have speculated on this. As Reform grows as a party, it has to mean that the leadership listens to voices that might not agree with it. The more people there are in a party, the more views there will be within that group of people. And the more MPs you get, the more internal discussion there will be. And Rupert Lowe was a Reform MP until last week. He's now had the whip withdrawn from him, so he now sits as an independent. He has been saying that Nigel Farage doesn't listen to alternative viewpoints. And in return, Reform, Nigel Farage and others in Reform have been criticising Rupert Lowe, and there's all sorts of allegations going on, which I'm not going to go into, but you should seek them out and find out more about them. I don't think this will be the last time this sort of thing happens. Nigel Farage has a habit of building up parties that he then can't maintain. We saw it with UKIP, which when he left UKIP, he said he was frustrated with the amount of far-right people who had joined it. And obviously they've got the Brexit Party as well, which is slightly different because it kind of morphed into the Reform Party. So that doesn't really exist anymore. UKIP still does exist, but has zero impact on national politics. So he's got a habit of starting things that then go awry. And so my assumption is that history will repeat itself, although we are seeing how Trump has done well in America, and Farage is quite similar in many ways, another populist. It's very difficult to know what Farage would do with power. It's very difficult to know how you see, they didn't even call it a manifesto at the election reform. They called it a contract, how their contract with the public would work. So it's a bit of a mess at the moment, I think, Reform. And I think it will carry on being a mess, but I could be wrong, of course. It could carry on becoming successful, and Farage could grow in his role as a party which doesn't just have his views but has lots of people with their own opinions in it. But what Rupert Lowe has highlighted, I think, is that there are discussions within Reform that everyone expects to be resolved by Farage. And that other people's opinions matter less. That's what he's highlighting. I think over time we'll see how true that is. I suspect it probably is true, but that's not to take away from the fact that there are allegations about Rupert Lowe as well. I'm not going to get into those, but I'm not saying that they're not true. It seems like a whole mess with a party that's only got five MPs, 4 now. Very odd. I've also been interested in how all of this impacts on the Conservatives. Kemi Badenoch, leader of the Tories, is in a difficult position. People are talking about replacing her. And if they did replace her, I think it would be the 7th Tory leader in 9 years. That doesn't indicate to me a fully functioning political party and one that's stable and knows where it's going in the world. So I think it's because if she is not good enough to be leader, and she's not proving herself to be a suitable leader of the opposition at the moment, if she isn't good enough, but then they get rid of her and they replace her with someone else, that just looks terrible. Having so many leaders in just such a short time, it kind of indicates that it's almost impossible to lead the Conservative Party at the moment. So maybe nobody would be doing a good job right now. She has focused very clearly on moving more towards a Reform UK position on things like immigration, in the hope that she can stem the tide of people switching votes. And I've been following the polls quite closely. Reform over the last few weeks have actually been polling slightly ahead of the Labour Party. Things changed this week. Labour are now back in the lead on average. Take an average of all of the polls. Labour are in the lead now. Reform dropping down a bit, and the Tories are going up again. So we've got several things going on here. We've got the problems that Reform are having internally, but I think a bigger issue right now actually is Reform's closeness. Nigel Farage's closeness to Donald Trump is more of an issue than anything, and that is benefiting both Labour and the Conservatives right now, because the country, the UK citizens, are not liking Donald Trump. He is disliked quite roundly by the citizens of the country, and so being closely allied to Donald Trump is not helping Nigel Farage. I don't think we've seen an effect in the polls yet on the internal troubles in Reform. I think that might come later this week when we see whether they're dropping even further. But divided parties don't do well. Parties that are having internal splits tend not to do well because people want stability in the political system. It doesn't look like it when you look at the way the British people have been voting over the last 10 years. But generally speaking, they want stability, not volatility within the system. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of that goes in the next few weeks or so. Will Reform continue to grow? They're growing, at an amazing rate. Will Nigel Farage be able to mould the party so that it does allow dissent within it, that people can debate things fully in that party? Or does it continue to be a figure, or does he continue to be the figurehead of it and the only show in town? That's going to be the interesting thing. The only way that Reform will do well is if Nigel Farage accepts criticism and accepts that other people have got ideas. Ultimately, it will fail if it's just about him. We don't have a presidential system. We might have a very presidential culture to our system. The media focus very much on the personalities of party leaders, but ultimately we've got a parliamentary system and a party-based system. And people who join parties expect to be able to influence them. What's the point of joining if you don't actually get a voice within that structure? So we'll see how it all develops. I think Kemi Badenoch getting a little bit higher in the polls will help her right now, but the real test comes at the beginning of May with local elections. Local elections happen in a very strange cycle. Not every local council has an election the same year. They're kind of done in blocks, and the blocks that are coming up are shire councils, rural areas, where the last time they were contested, Boris Johnson was flying high in the polls and they had one of their best results. It's not going to be the same. They've got a lot of seats to lose, and they would probably naturally fall back anyway a little bit because they did so well last time. It's going to be very interesting. And if Reform can keep themselves together and sort out some of these problems, I would expect them to do very well. But we will see. And then what does the Conservative Party do about Kemi Badenoch? Are they all waiting for those local election results to decide whether she can carry on or not? Each week, she has one opportunity to make a difference, and that is at PMQs. And each week, she is falling short. I don't think she's had a good PMQs yet. And I keep watching every Wednesday thinking, how bad is she going to be this time? So the Conservatives are looking for looking for something. I don't know if it's even possible to achieve what they want either. They certainly need someone who can perform better in the Commons, but I'm still not sure that with the group of MPs that they've got, because of course they've got a reduced number of MPs from July last year because they lost so many seats. Who could possibly take her place and do it and take the party in a direction that the public would like? I'm really not sure yet. Somebody will emerge if she is replaced. But like I say, 7 leaders in 9 years could soon turn into 8 in 10 years. Who knows? Who knows? Politics is volatile. Okay, so there's some thoughts. Reform, not doing as well as they were a few months ago, but the local elections might give them a chance to do better. We will see. Not convinced at all that Nigel Farage has got what it takes to actually lead a political party long term. The past proves that he hasn't, but people do grow in their roles and adapt, and that is the key thing to watch out for. What's he going to do differently, if anything, to keep the momentum that Reform have got? We will find out. Okay, spread the news about these videos, like, subscribe, and assuming that you're studying A-level politics, happy studying. Bye-bye.